Hello, Koch, and I'm the head of education department at the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. I'm also the coordinator of the Jewish Cultural Heritage Project. And as you know, the seminar is organized as part of this project. I would like to welcome you to the second day of the seminar. I hope you had a good day yesterday. And firstly, I would like to thank our partners from the Falstadt Center and my colleagues from Polin who were involved in carrying out this project in difficult conditions of home office mostly and working online. So thank you very much, guys. And I would like to say a few words about the Jewish Cultural Heritage Project. We have started that program actually in 2013 in Trondheim. In September, we came for a visit to Falstadt Center for a very interesting conference on crossing borders. We were able to meet, to have very good discussions, and to devise the project that was announced in Trondheim in September 2013. The first project was carried out from 2013 to 2017, and together with Falstadt Center, we realized student exchanges for Polish and Norwegian students. We had seminars for teachers, study visits for teachers, publications, many good projects, and our donors, which I should have thanked in the beginning, that are the Norway grants and the EEA grants. And also in this edition of the project, it's 15% of the Polish state budget. So our donors were very happy with the way we conducted the first project. We also got the Europa Nostra award for it. And they said that they would like us to continue, to make a proposal for continuation. And we received another predefined grant to carry out another edition of the Jewish Cultural Heritage Project in the years 2020 till April 2024. And the main purpose of the program is the protection of the heritage and popularization of the heritage of Polish Jews, but we also have a lot of projects devoted to intercultural learning, to promoting diversity, many projects devoted to people from marginalized groups, a lot of projects for school children and teachers. So together with Falstadt Center, who is one of our 5 partners on this, 5 Norwegian partners on this project, we have started the first edition in March. And soon after the beginning, it was started on March 2nd, everyone went into lockdown. And we have to, as the Americans say, we pivoted to online activities. We had to learn very fast how to do them, how to move in this virtual world, which we're still learning. And I hope this seminar is helpful. It will be helpful to us all. And actually, it's the first seminar that we're organizing in partnership with the Norwegian institution online. And I'm very curious about your feedback, your opinions. I hope it will, make us, help us make next seminars better. And I do hope that we will be able to meet in person soon. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good day. Thank you.
Now it is time for some reflections on digital games as memory media in the presentation Too Far Away or Too Close to the Past. The presentation will be conducted by Tabea Wiedmann, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Constance. In her research, she focuses on the digitalization of memory cultures and concepts of medializing witnessing surrounding the Holocaust. Her dissertation project, The Game in the Memory, a memory cultural analysis of prosthetic witnesses of the Holocaust in digital games, explore digital games as memory media and acts of gameplay as gestures of witnessing. After her bachelor's degree in European Cultural History and Comparative Literature at the University of Augsburg, she earned a master's degree in European Cultural Studies at the University of Constance and wrote her MA thesis on humor and Holocaust remembrance in film. Following her master's degree, she worked as an academic staff member on the research project Memos, where she participated in the conceptualization, realization, and content-related authoring of an internet platform about modern and medialized strategies of memory transfer and testimony. Welcome.
Dear participants of the seminar, dear Director Wee, dear Director Szczepinski, dear Christian and dear Magdalena, hello to all of you from Constance, Germany. I'm very excited to be a part of this seminar, and it gives me great pleasure to speak to you today. Of course, the distance between my presentation and your reception of it makes it quite difficult to initiate a dialogue. But it is my deep conviction that ideas and impulses all only grow and get better through exchange. So I invite you all to reach out and contact me with any questions, feedback, or further ideas that you might have after this presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. As my title, Too Far Away From or Too Close to the Past, some reflections on digital games as memory media suggests, today I would like to elaborate a bit on the tensions of a digital memory culture of the Holocaust. I will focus on digital games since, in my opinion, they can serve to explicitly illustrate such tensions. Thereby, I will dip into two very vibrant and ever-diversifying fields of research, the digital memory studies as well as the game studies. What I would like to do today is to direct the spotlight on a circumstance that I myself stumble across repeatedly in my research. It is the ambivalent quality of digital memory cultures, the necessity to acknowledge their advantages and drawbacks at the same time. In her research, Sibylle Krämer uses the metaphor of the two-faced Roman god Janus. Janus is the god of beginnings and endings, his two faces turned into opposite directions. I like this image since it expresses, in my opinion, the complexity of memory cultures as a practiced and lived discourse. Ambivalent structures lie at the core of all the ongoing processes, ideas, and changes that the participating actors take upon themselves in their quest to live up to the ever-repeated, yet ever so difficult to achieve, never again. I will use the metaphor here to try to follow Janus's two gazes and regard matters from different angles. After a short cursory glance into the too close and too far away problematic of digital memory cultures per se, I shall introduce the notion of improper distance by Kate Nash as a conceptual means of orientation. Finally, I shall turn to digital games as those memory media that, in my opinion, allow us to follow these processes of negotiation and struggle explicitly. The indie game My Memory of Us, released in 2018 by the Polish game studio Juggler Games, will serve as the concluding example to highlight my arguments. The necessity to remember derives from the core obligation to pass on survivors' testimonies, to prevent them from falling silent, and to find a prospective meaning from a past event that questions humanity itself ex negativo. By now, the discourse surrounding the Holocaust and its remembrance appears very diverse and seems, at least in most European countries, secured with the help of institutions, archives, libraries, and experts. It seems that we have gathered many of the historical facts so that it is possible, close to globally anybody, to inform oneself about this certain past. To put it more bluntly, Holocaust memory is ubiquitously available and accessible. As a mundane element of everyday media communication, the repetitive desiderate of never again seems to be guaranteed. But is it? The media scholar John Ellis gets to the heart of the matter when he argues, "We cannot say we didn't know, We cannot hide behind a frame of innocence due to ignorance, as many bystanders have claimed in the past. For us born after, we didn't know is not an option anymore. The digital memory network, as Andrew Hoskins has coined the digital memory sphere, is virtually omnipresent. And yet, apparently, there is the need to know more, to know better, that seems to motivate many of the ongoing attempts and impulses of digital memory media. They try to offer ever more immersive, ever more seemingly authentic experiences of the past. Is it out there, that ideal approach to the past, through which the latter becomes tangible, experienceable, understandable? The broad generous vision of digital memory cultures is, in my opinion, exactly entangled within that tension. We use the immersive techniques of digital media to create virtual spheres, versions of memory atmospheres, of memory spaces, images, and narratives, to conjure up the past as a sphere that reaches into our everyday life. But this endeavor of a history on the holodeck, to play with Janet Murray's pioneer work Hamlet on the holodeck, can also be regarded quite critically. It has a second phase, the danger of distortion. Distortion does not only mean that, depending on the interpreting source, historical facts might be altered or simply faked, but, and I believe this problem can be considered as much more urgent, that despite the sheer immensity of the memory discourses surrounding the Holocaust, some elements are unproportionately overrepresented, be it certain persons, certain places, certain images, or even narratives. As various scholars, among them Aleida Assmann, have pointed out, the more the Holocaust becomes an affair of mass media, the more it is entangled with digital communication processes. This means memory becomes dependent on medium-specific conditions and traditions of representation. This leads to many risks, among them the dangers of routinization, trivialization, standardization, as well as a growing narrowing of included topics and themes, as well as of modes of representation. To conclude these two first gazes on digital Holocaust memory, the many creative, medialized attempts to remember the Holocaust have opened many possibilities to gain knowledge, to archive and structure and connect, to create a democratizing, or, as the game and media scholar Henry Jenkins has put it, a converging memory sphere. But with the enthusiasm and creative energy that we can, and we should, draw from these developments, remain uncertainties and dangers as well. On the one hand, this means that we are obliged to approach mediated memory accesses according to their medium-specific qualities, reflecting their hierarchies concerning human-system interaction, and finally, reflecting the hierarchies of access, who can use those digital memory media. On the other hand, even more obviously, we have to acknowledge the fact that the face of digital memory forms and cultures is constantly changing and will continue to do so. This is where, in my opinion, the concept of improper distance might give us a useful tool of orientation to grasp these ongoing negotiations more concretely. In her paper, Virtual Reality Witness, Exploring the Ethics of Mediated Presence, Kate Nash discusses the improper distance of mediated memory accesses. Even though she focuses on VR applications, I would like to put her reflections into a broader spectrum that can also serve for the purpose to look at video games. In her discussion, Nash is mostly concerned with the morality of such memory approaches, and I quote, "I suggest that the moral potential of VR is best explained in terms of its ability to promote an imaginative transportation to another time and/or space. However, I suggest that this ability comes with an inherent moral risk, the risk of improper distance, in which the other becomes indistinguishable from ourselves." Nash therefore uses the improper distance, originally a concept of the post-colonial studies developed by Lili Chuliaraki, to express her reflection on the potential too close of a VR memory approach. As soon as the medialized access, this fictitious attempt that retrospectively interprets the historical memories, covers up the original transfer, the original voice of a victim, then its immersive potential is dangerous, its distance too small and therefore improper. In her argument, Nash follows various scholars, such as Sue Tate, who connects the responsibility of reception with the ability to react, to perceive oneself as meaningfully involved in a process. Responsibility then becomes responsibility. This is also one of the central aspects that Nash identifies, through which a reception via VR can become a moral event. Morality lies in the gaining of a meaningful knowledge, meaningful in the sense that it touches the user, cognitively as well as emotionally. If the meaningfulness of a media usage is missing, if the user is not involved, the experience remains as too far away. Improper distance can therefore also help to refer to the other pole, the risk of producing a memory experience that does not function as such, that maybe only uses the past as a fascinating background setting. Furthermore, the user is involved in the acquisition of knowledge. She becomes aware of herself through her own activity. Activity then, according to Nash, is the second requirement for a moral memory experience. This activity, again, can be structured into three interwoven layers. First, it is experienced through the suggestion of presence, an idea of being there and doing things with the represented past. Activity is hereby suggested through the medium. Secondly, it's performed on a bodily level as well, within the regulations, the specific requirements of a medium, be it clicking, scrolling, or pressing keys. Our very own physical bodies do something. They are involved, and here activity lies within the very personal body actions. Thirdly, and maybe most importantly and difficult to grasp, this activity is expressed in the mental activity through which the experience, and only then, can become a meaningful encounter with the past. This form of activity is mostly internal. It represents a process of reflection, understanding, or acknowledgement. So, suggested by the medium, experienced through the own body, as well as the personal mental processes. Activity is present on all three layers. The improper distance, then, is negotiated via the interplay of these two very fluid elements, activity and meaningfulness. The proper distance, consequently, is nothing static, but rather part of ongoing negotiations, an ideal yet only momentary condition, a wink of balance that shifts constantly. Using Nash's idea of improper distance, then, the central question regarding a vivid memory culture can be put as follows. How can proper distance be achieved? Where does it start and improper distance end? How can we, as younger generations, produce digital approaches that appear close enough that the experience is meaningful, but also distant enough that we do not forget, for example, as Diana Popescu has repeatedly stressed in her work, that mediated memory is always, to a certain degree, imagined memory. And most importantly, how can we create approaches that acknowledge the fact that a moral position is distant from the position of victims and does not occupy their voices and their individual testimonies? The key aspects that I would like to elaborate further in context of digital games are exactly the meaningful engagement as well as the involving activity. Digital games have exactly these two qualities that Nash connects with the negotiation of improper distance. And their ability to allow the player interaction with a rich, detailed world that aims to create an atmosphere of authenticity and recognition, of fascination and emotional investment, they offer deeply involving, literally touching experiences. In digital games, meaningful engagement and activity are connected reciprocally. Meaningful engagement with a game means to be active as a player, to move around, to do things with the offered game world. Yet at the same time, it is the latter that makes the activities meaningful. The pressing of a key evolves into collecting coins. A click can mean to shoot or start a dialogue with another character. It is exactly thanks to their engagement via movement, their constant shimmering between control and immersion, that digital games highlight the ambivalent movements of distance and proximity that I introduced with the polls too far away and too close. Before illustrating my point further, however, it seems important to reflect at least shortly on the relation of digital games with history. Only few things wake such an obvious fascination, such an enchantment on players, as the possibility to slide into past worlds, to exit the present reality and hide within the exciting adventures of digital histories. Yet a player is not helplessly surrendered to a game and its rules. Instead, digital games offer a space wherein the player's own convictions, beliefs, and imaginations are confronted with a complex, systematic world. Hereby, games can create reflexive moments that influence the player long after the actual game act. The represented history is embedded in various elements of digital games. Nico Nolden, for example, defines the latter as complex knowledge systems about the past. They rely on objects, narrative entanglements, abstract models, as well as their worldliness, to evoke a certain atmosphere that is consumed in motion, defined through the constantly invited activity of the players. As memory media, digital games then hold the power to exactly express the belief system that surround our imagination about the past, exemplary strategies that one developer deemed as a suitable way and a suitable narrative to approach the latter. Therefore, the game's quality to create engaging, procedural processes of involvement appears ideal to be analyzed closer with the question of the moral implications, their improper distance towards the past in mind. Yet the relationship between games and Holocaust memory is quite a complicated one. I shall summarize three of the most striking aspects. First of all, and maybe most obvious, the tension between a game and the serious task of moral remembrance appears incompatible. As media, games are still connected to an idea of playfulness, an occupation that evokes fun, happiness, or at least satisfaction in their players. As Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman have defined it, a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that result in a quantifiable outcome. So the urge to overcome a conflict, to beat the system, so to speak, and thereby to collect rewards or at least recognition in some form, lie hereby at the core. But how is such a notion compatible with the intention of an ethical remembrance, a prospective learning from the pains of remembering the Holocaust? Can it therefore ever be proper to approach this event that negates resolution per se via a medium that functions because it promises a solution in the end? Additionally, digital games are often mentally coined as a medium of neo-fascist movements, referring to games such as Cassette Manager, or as a phenomenon of the digital age, the presence of groups with fascist, right-wing, anti-Semitic or racist ideologies on gaming platforms. The medium digital game is still fighting a bad reputation. Moreover, especially pedagogical debates often circle around the dangers of addiction or the radicalization of players. Yet to label digital games as exclusively radical, addictive occupations that lead to an increase of aggression or right-wing ideologies is a very superficial, one-dimensional view. It transfers certain convictions about a marginal phenomenon onto the whole gaming branch as well as the very diverse gaming communities. Their continuously questioned moral capacity might also be co-responsible for the fact that the majority of games have so far avoided to thematize the Holocaust in their diverse historical representation, while the historical setting of warfare during the years 1939 to 1945 is among the most popular game topics, ranging a multitude of game genres. The topic of the Holocaust has so far been mostly excluded. The franchise had a series of strategy games set on various battlefields of World War II, is only one popular example for this avoidance strategy. Eugen Pfister, one of the academic pioneers that sought to connect digital games and the representability of the Holocaust, has put it like this, and I quote, "In this game, no player ever has to confront the crimes against humanity committed in the name of an inhumane ideology. World War II is effectively whitewash." Unquote. The developers of the game even went so far as to prohibit players on various platforms to create their own mods, so their own player-generated modifications that might integrate the Holocaust into the game belatedly. This strategy of avoidance illustrates how the gaming industry, the majority of producers and studios, have so far been reluctant in accepting their own responsible role as actors within the digital memory cultures, fearing censoring, bad PR, and all too low sales numbers. Many producers still seek the secure route and do not mention the Holocaust. And yet, especially within the recent years, we can determine a mental shift from the gaming sector itself, a growing consciousness about how much this medium shapes powerful ideas and images about the past. The German game producer Jörg Friedrich, for example, argues, and I quote, "Digital games are the narrating media of the 21st century. But if someone learned everything they like to know about the Third Reich only qua video games, there would be no Holocaust within the history, and the Nazis would be the group that nobody likes, yet that possesses the snazziest uniforms as well as the best tanks." This exemplary critical voice from within the gaming industry shows that the consciousness of the influence of digital games as memory media is growing. The gaming industry slowly breaks open the own myth of games being apolitical means of pure entertainment. To return to the metaphor at hand, games are not too far away to serve as modern digital memory media. Before turning to my example, let me summarize very briefly what I have established so far. The current ambivalence of digital memory cultures can be expressed in a shimmering between too far away and too close to Holocaust memories. The time gap towards this history is growing every day, filled with more and more medial expressions that we create to overcome it. At the same time, these medial means are increasingly able to involve us, immerse us into their creative worlds, giving us the feeling that the past is only one click away. I use the notion of improper distance to determine this ambivalence more closely, to include the question of morality within the shimmering. Digital games then hold, in my opinion, the very special capacity to uncover said ambivalence explicitly. They create meaningful experiences with the history through their interactive structure, their potential to involve a player actively, intellectually as well as effectively. Turning to digital games, then, can help us to detect ongoing negotiations about the improper distance towards Holocaust memory. It is therefore important to take a look at specific approaches, specific video games, and reflect on how they position themselves within the broader discourses, what different strategies they use to create improper distance. To illustrate this idea further, I would like now, finally, to turn to the announced example, My Memory of Us. I've decided to include this specific game since its game world is set in Poland, more specifically within Warsaw, and therefore continues the joining perspectives of this seminar. Within the following analysis, I will limit my explanations to some exemplary aspects of the game that I perceive as strategies to negotiate between the two poles, too close or too far away. As the game title already implies, this game is all about memory. I will follow its traces on two levels. On the one hand, in the unfolding game story, and on the other, its game mechanics, that is to say, its rules, possibilities of interaction, and the system that frame the emergent story. Let me start with the narrative setting. And indeed, the story of My Memory of Us starts very innocently. Playing the avatar of a young girl that is fond of robots and looking for a new exciting reading, the player enters a bookshop. There the girl finds an old, torn photograph. It shows another young girl, smiling and waving. Inspired by his young customer and the old photo, the shop owner begins to share his story, a story of his childhood, of his best friend and their adventures. This story, set within the game's past, becomes the main narrative setting of the game. The past of the shop owner is played out. This inner story also starts quite harmlessly. The boy, as the younger self of the shop owner, meets a young girl that becomes his best friend. Together they roam the town, visit her grandfather and enjoy playing with each other. Yet this harmonious situation changes when a robot army arrives. This does not only lead to the destruction and catastrophes of war, but at a certain point of the game, a part of the population is captured and their clothes are turned red. This also happens to the girl and her grandfather. Additionally, they are forced to move to a separate area of the city. Moreover, as it becomes more and more difficult to survive within this ghetto, the robot army spreads rumors about places only for the so-called red people, where they can live and will have enough to eat. Only none of the people that agree to the transport to these places are ever seen again. During this chaos of war, the children meet a group of resistance fighters that help red-colored kids to escape the ghetto, sending them to parents beyond. When the girl's grandfather dies, the boy makes it his priority to save the girl. In the final breathless escape through the sewers of the ghetto, he succeeds to accompany her to a couple that takes the girl with them. Her red color fades away. As a memento to their friendship, the girl tears up the photograph, keeping the part with the boy where the latter keeps her portrait, exactly the same portrait that inspired the old shop owner to share his memories. Though this marks the end of the owner's story, it does not mark the end of the game, because once hearing the full account, the girl in the shop recognizes it. It's a story she has heard many times from her grandmother. Said grandmother promptly arrives at the shop to pick up her granddaughter and is ultimately revealed as the small girl from the owner's memories. Finally reunited, the best friends meet again and the game is ended. It thusly releases the player with a cathartic ending of reunion, a healing process of the past. It tells, to put it bluntly, a fairy tale version of surviving the terrors of the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust through friendship. While the game's story encourages to relate to the avatars and helps the player to be cognitively as well as emotionally invested with the plot, I suspect that it is exactly here where the fine line of close and too close lies hidden. I would like to highlight this suspicion by having a closer look at the two avatars, their characters. As children, the boy and the girl represent from the very beginning completely innocent and therefore explicitly unambiguous characters. It is easy to identify with them, or rather, it is safe to identify with them. Their innocence becomes adaptable for the player, since she is the one moving the children, helping them succeed in their everyday adventures as well as the more serious struggles to survive. The story allows the player to feel comfortable with their own position. It is a positive role, a supportive role, where the protection of the children triggers a lot of the player's activities. While I do believe that this position attempts to reach the proper distance, I see its distorting potentials in two aspects. First, the story in general throws a simplifying black and white narrative sheet over a very complex societal development. The gameplay develops a schema where people mostly behave humanly, and alien robots are the monsters capable of destruction. Perpetrators and victims, as well as perpetrators and bystanders, are visually clearly distinguishable. Under this perspective, the game negates the two central and very haunting historical aspects. One, that it was human that were responsible for the Holocaust, and exactly not robotic monsters. And secondly, that the position of bystanders and perpetrators are often fluid, achingly obscure. It is exactly the grey area, the question of how bystanders behave, that haunts the memory cultures. A player of My Memory of Us never has to question the morality of her own position. An even stronger distortion that intensified the uncomfortably positive connotation for the player's perspective happens within the game narrative, when the avatar of the girl decides that she too wants to go to one of those places where there is food and housing for the red people. While she is allowed to enter one of the waiting trains, the boy is denied access. He then decides to use one of the robot's machines to dye himself red as well, so that he can be with his best friend. As players from later generations, we know exactly where the waiting train is going. With this knowledge, the gesture of the boy appears even more selfless. He is willing to join his friend, being aware that he will from then on suffer the same dangers. From a memory culture perspective, though, this decision is dangerously distorting. Not only does it strengthen the wrong notion that friendship would have enough to turn not affected bystanders into supportive helpers that defended the victims. This was certainly most often not the case. But moreover, and even more critically, this act turns the avatar of the boy into another directly affected victim. In his attempt to save the girl, the game supports a narrative of self-victimization. This sets a crass contrast to the hostile means for which the Nazi regime marked people as enemies, as people unworthy of living, and the helplessness of these people to escape such persecution. In this connotation, I see exactly the danger that Nash points to, that the fictitious narratives of a well-told story cover up the position of the few surviving historical victims. Of course, one can detect further narrative strategies within My Memory of Us that, again, relativize such a danger, that push the game's position further towards the distance of the too far away pole, so to speak. One of such distancing moments lies within the narrative structure of the framing plot of the girl in the bookshop and the subplot as the mainly played story of the boy and the girl. The shop owner identifies himself as the speaking subject, marking the subplot as his memories. Thereby, the player can always rely on this frame of timely distance. It invites emotional distance as well. Additionally, it is the voice of the shop owner, so the elder version of the boy, that narrates within the cutscenes, passive passages where the player cannot interact. The latter disrupt the immersive adventures of the two kids repeatedly. The cutscenes serve as rhythmical reminders that the effective, now and again very emotionally touching sequences of the play are set in the game's implied past. They have already happened and must have been successfully mastered. The old man could not tell his story otherwise. Another distancing moment lies for sure also in the used metaphor. The game space, the local setting, is never explicitly named as Warsaw or Poland or even ghetto or concentration camps, nor are the enemies introduced as Nazis or the victim called Jews. Instead, the game talks about the city, the area of the red people, of robots and the evil mastermind behind it all, the Robot King. But the aesthetics are used so schematically that they can immediately be detected as a distancing strategy, a way to tell a story about the past without actually talking about the past. The shop owner identifies himself from the very beginning as an unreliable narrator. The metaphor of the Robot King and his armies is used deliberately to tell the story in a child-oriented manner. Furthermore, in his explanation to adapt the story, the game does not hide this strategy. For example, the shop owner says explicitly, and I quote, "I brewed some tea and decided I was going to tell her a story, a robot story." The metaphors are therefore used to be broken, to be seen through. In this context, the game follows a tradition of artistic attempts to use a child's perspective, as well as a childlike expression to talk about the Holocaust and precisely its impossibility to be represented adequately. The red people remind strongly of Mauschwitz and the Nazi cats of the Mouse comics by Art Spiegelman, or Out With, and the striped pyjamas that John Boyne uses as the leitmotif in his novel The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. Conclusively, we can then, within the narrative setting of My Memory of Us, acknowledge various strategies to create immersion, effective closeness, and even problematic identification. Yet there are also certainly strategies to create a distance to the represented past, to identify the game world as something artificial, distorted, and fictitious as memories to a certain degree always tend to be. Let's turn then to the game setting, its system and its rules. And how far can we detect tendencies of improper distance here? At first glance, one might feel tempted to move my memory of us, due to its mediality, a priori straight into the corner of too far away. I seek to stress two aspects that indeed hold this danger exemplarily strong, that make the format of a game questionable as a memory medium. It's its integration of spaces of memory, especially the space ghetto, as well as its systematic structure. Let me turn to the first aspect, the experience of the ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto is among the central places of memory, not only for the Polish national memory, but even globally. As a comparatively well-documented scene, the living conditions, the fear and hunger of the imprisoned people, yet also their attempts to survive, their strategies to network and also to resist are known, can be traced by later generations. As one of the central icons of Holocaust memory, especially the photograph of the boy with his hands raised above his head, stands for the brutality, the oppression the population of the ghetto in Warsaw had to face. As one of the central icons of Holocaust memory, especially the photograph of the boy with his hands raised above his head stands for the brutality, the oppression the population of the ghetto in Warsaw had to face. Under the metaphor of its steampunk-themed fairy tale, however, the game introduces the ghetto mostly as a navigable sphere of adventure. Looking for his friend and her grandfather, the boy finds his way into the ghetto and promptly meets a member of the resistance who instructs him to smuggle a radio to another meeting point. Historically speaking, both activities, being part of a resistance group as well as possessing a radio, were extremely dangerous, life-threatening activities. Yet here, being caught merely equals a temporary setback for the player and the necessity to start over from the latest saving point. Furthermore, the boy even uses the radio to play music and distract others so that he can successfully navigate around angry adults and robot soldiers, both equal in their ludic threat. So even though the game focuses on historically relevant and powerful memory icons, such as the radio and the ghetto, the ludonarrative setting remains mostly in the exploratory thrill of navigation, of tactical movements. As a place of memory, however, the ghetto is only marginally represented. The second aspect, where the game mechanics rather impede its proper distance as a memory medium, lies in its leveled structure. The game follows a classical structure of adventure games, where each level holds new and most often stronger opponents that have to be overcome. And while my memory of us seeks to integrate the growing challenges for the play into the narrative, it is, in my opinion, within the very last confrontation where the game shows most strongly the problematic relationship of the medium and its topic. Escaping in a bathing tub through the sewers of the city, the girl and the boy are suddenly attacked by a monstrous fish. In a game-wise very traditional round-based fight, the girl and the boy have to overcome it through their cooperation. The boy navigates the tub, while the girl shoots stalactites at the fish, thereby destroying its armor. This fight is the most difficult confrontation to be integrated into the game's narrative setting. Beforehand, it was necessary to defuse bombs, evade robotic soldiers, or destroy searching drones, all clearly marked as members of the hostile troops. Yet here, suddenly, appears an opponent that seems devoid of reference to the adversary collective and, at least speaking from my personal gaming experience, helplessly random. One might argue that to put the monstrous fish at the end, the game seeks to negate a traditional increase of the evilness of enemies, from common foot soldier to specialized elites, and ultimately, as a boss fight, the leading criminals. Yet in its avoidance, the game falls back on its own medial traditions, namely fighting as the main mechanism, and fighting the biggest monster as the final confrontation. Let me now again turn to the second Janus head and highlight where the game reacts consciously to its own power as a memory medium and seeks to move its setting, returning to our axis, towards a proper distance to the past, where the events of the game become meaningful. Here I will limit my remarks to two aspects, namely the varying game mechanics as well as the collection of memories. while, as I have stated, the general trias of obstacle, failure, and success, navigated by the game rules, can hinder to create a meaningful memory experience via play, my memory of us adapts the rules according to the advancing narrative. This becomes most obvious in the meaning of failure when the avatars are discovered by hostile robots. In the beginning, discovery equals arrest. The avatars and other characters lift their hands and look frightened. But as soon as the girl and the boy both share the red color, being discovered does not merely result in arrest, but rather the temporary death of the avatars. Upon being hit by a searching light or one of the patrolling dogs or drones, the girl and the boy dissolve, turned into red flakes of ash. One can of course question the appropriateness of this metaphor. Yet with this change, the game mechanics illustrate the growing threat, the increasing danger, and ultimately the fatal intent of the robot army. Within these moments, it shortly breaks the fairy tale metaphor, forcing the player to make the historical connection of what being caught and captured resulted in for most victims of the Nazi regime. The gameplay therefore becomes more investing, the danger increases, as does the urgency to save the children. Moreover, an even clearer connection to the historical events is drawn through the separate submenu of memories that my memory of us offers. In each level, the player can find a photograph that, once collected, appears within the separate menu Memories. Memories is designed like a gallery, providing a photo with a short description and historical background information. The presented game characters get thereby connected to the historical sphere. They can be recognized in their translated roles. Here again, the game communicates its artificiality, separating the past with its voices from the setting that it offers. Moreover, the developers use the space to communicate their very own intention. They write, and I quote, "During your journey, you will encounter characters based on real people from history. In this part of the game, you will be able to read their stories. We hope that your journey through this game will help keep their achievements and values alive. They are worthy of being recognized and remembered. From the depths of our hearts, we encourage you to do so." If they are successful in this endeavor, is open to debate. But the gallery of memories offers an additional motivation to play my memory of us, namely, to discover all photographs, and thereby to draw the connection between game and past, to break the metaphor and reflect about it. In this moment, then, the game can become meaningful as a memory medium. How now to conclude this excursion into the ambivalent structures of digital memory cultures and digital games as memory media? It was my intention to illustrate some central aspects. As the short insight into my memory of us has shown, each memory medium is connected to the ongoing negotiations of the memory cultures surrounding the Holocaust. Consequently, one can find diverse strategies within each medium through which it positions itself within the discourses, seeking to find a proper distance towards the past. Furthermore, all memory media share a history of how to approach the past, how they seek to express memories about the Holocaust. They are deeply entangled and connected. Their means of distribution, the involved actors, and last but not least, their economic value influence each format, each strategy of expression. Additionally, the experience of ambivalence, of unease even, works in my opinion as a driving power within the digital memory sphere. It can give proof to the vibrancy of this field of research, of this cultural sphere that still touches the daily life of so many of us. To come across discrepancies, to recognize ruptures means that people are striving to find expressions, to pass on, to share. The improper distance in this context might help to express this negotiation, to create an image, an axis that might provide further moral orientation. Finally, I believe it is exactly this confrontation of our idea of what a successful memory culture might be made of and what establishes a successful game that can serve as the ideal nutrient solution, so to speak, to rethink both. The connection I seek to stress is exactly this demand to be in movement, to be agile, to think and to act. Movement, exploration, physical involvement, in short, negotiations on various levels make up the main modus operandi of digital games and their experiences. I believe that the ambivalence of remembering as an ongoing act embedded into the digital sphere can be mirrored in the promoted procedural activity of digital games. Thusly, I am convinced that the combination of game and memory will influence both spheres and will shape our understanding of playing as well as remembering in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tabea. Now it is time for another break, or again, pause, as we call it in Norwegian. The same cultural performances that were shown earlier will also be shown during this break. For those who saw that yesterday, we would highly recommend to stand up, walk away from your computer desk, and stretch a bit and get some fresh air if you can. See you back soon.
Tu chi dormi, ista pedra scolpita d'ave sofferto da colpi e ferita, dopo d'atroci e martir, per suai ancu la vita, udi e reposi tranquil, ad soffrenza e finida, ma è asa fiamma ardente, brucio e mudio, tutta mi sente, sai lamenti di compagni ed una mamma li pienti che amo ancora Dio supremo, ci ridornistu nucente.
Welcome back. Our next presentation is Courtroom 600, a virtual reality encounter with evidence of the Holocaust. The presentation will be made by Clarissa Seglio, PhD, who's an Associate Director of Research at Greenhouse Studios, Scholarly Communications Design at the University of Connecticut, where she's also Assistant Professor of Digital Humanities. She works at the intersections of public history, museum studies, and digital media, and collaborates with museums, archives, and other on public-facing research projects that engage diverse audiences in topics of contemporary concern. She is joined by Ken Thompson, who's a game designer and educator at the University of Connecticut. His research focuses on developing experiences that tackle difficult and serious subjects. This work includes Courtroom 600 and a National Science Foundation-funded effort to foster independent science learning through game-based approaches. He previously worked as game designer and lead designer in industry, where his responsibilities included directing game projects, programming unique scenarios, using specialized software tools, and working with publishers. Welcome.
Thank you to our colleagues in Norway and Poland and their sponsors for the opportunity to present to you today. Our story begins with the International Military Tribunal papers of Executive Trial Counsel Thomas J. Dodd. These are held by the University of Connecticut's Archives and Special Collections. Our goal is to think about how future generations might engage with this open access, word searchable digital collection. The result, which we call by its prototype name Courtroom 600, is an interactive virtual reality experience being developed according to game and instructional design principles for use in museum and ultimately home settings. Our project is still in its very early stages. Because Greenhouse Studios is an interdisciplinary research unit, the making of this project is very much about grappling with the many issues that history telling in this relatively new medium of interaction and embodiment poses. It is also an examination of how game developers, historians, education design experts, artists and design technologists, archivists, and museum professionals can work together collaboratively from the very outset, rather than have one discipline serve in a vendor relation to another, so that we might develop a humanities-based approach to work in VR. Let's hear some of these disciplinary perspectives.
Hi, my name is Ken Thompson, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Connecticut, where I create interactive experiences. When I think about the times that I worked as a game designer in the industry, I have a lot of fond memories. It's been a place of inspiration for me and friendship, and I really like playing World War II games like Day of Defeat, Call of Duty, Panzer General. I've also created games based off of cartoon heroes like Captain America, whose reputations are created around the World War II era. And the events of the war have been retold and told again by many entertainers in many mediums like movies and books, as well as the game industry today. But games have historically had a little bit of a challenge addressing some of the experiences and the events of the general population and the war crimes that were perpetrated by the Nazis, including those who stood at trial in Nuremberg. So despite that millions of copies sold, rarely do World War II games depict anything about like Jewish stars scrawled on a business door, a ghetto, or concentration camps that were around. This is a difficult subject matter for the game medium, and that's why it's really important that academics and developers and museums work together to provide guideposts to the future, and to think through approaches and difficult topics and how to address the surrounding issues on user agency and the ability for users to affect the world, which is one of the really great powers of game development. Additionally, I think the world has started to realize the role of interactive media in tackling serious and educational issues. We see our work as one of several interactive projects to tackle more serious events that took place during the Holocaust and leading up to it, including The Last Goodbye and accompanying interactive hologram, and Brenda Romero's Train, which was a board game, and Attentat 1942, and the works of so many others at museums like at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And that's why I'm working with my colleagues here at the University of Connecticut, because we're trying to create a narrative that will engage the very users that have been playing games all along, but have been missing, I think, key elements of the narrative that happened during World War II. And we're finding that the younger population is losing touch with important media that unpacks the Holocaust and the events leading up to the authoritarianism that perpetrated these horrors.
Hi, my name is Greg Colati. I am the Director of the Connecticut Digital Archive and a Senior Strategist at Greenhouse Studios here at the University of Connecticut. As a trained archivist, it's my job to try to find new ways to connect and engage people with historical documents, especially a new generation of students who is used to using digital and technological means to interact with information that they encounter. The Courtroom 600 project allows us to bring historical documents out of the archives and into people's hands so they can interact with them in the context of the world in which they were created, as well as the context of the world in which they live now, giving them a deeper and more personal understanding of the events of the past in ways that we really can't do in a reading room or just by looking at the content itself. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Clarissa Seglio, Associate Director of Research for Greenhouse Studios. My research interests in this area of VR, particularly for our project, include how we can convey the sense of archival discovery and the meaning making that comes from connections across different material artifacts, as well as the context within which they belong and begin to tell us about the past. And to create this experience for informal, self-directed learners outside of the schoolroom setting. I'm also very interested in the issues surrounding the ethics of interactive embodiment and how that creates historical understanding. One way to think of a multi-part game-based experience like Courtroom 600 is to think of the completed work as a book and each of its learning modules as individual chapters. As we work toward development of a fully functioning prototype of the first chapter, which is being built in Unity 3D for the HTC Vive system, our early steps include establishing the intellectual framework. In game, these are called the design pillars. For the historian, they are the recurring themes that are at the heart of the experience. They are the touchstones for making decisions about content, narrative, focus, and emphasis. They guide how we think about the relationships between learning objectives, learner choices, different narrative paths through the experience, and the outcomes that we want the learner to bring with them as they move from the virtual realm back to their daily lives. Other work includes 3D photogrammetry and digital capture of the spaces in which the experience will take place, including the courtroom in Nuremberg where the trial of the major war criminals took place. Also, bringing this scan of the contemporary Courtroom 600 back to its form in 1945-46 based on blueprints and other archival material. We have been fortunate, too, to work with colleagues at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, who have been generous with their expertise and advice as we work to integrate materials from their extensive online repository into the experience, and also doing 3D modeling of artifacts as well. They, along with other scholarly advisors, participated in a 2-day design charrette. This is part of our iterative design process, making, releasing at early stages to receive formative feedback from advisors and individuals representative of the audiences we seek to engage. Taking that feedback, going back, revising, refining, and releasing again. This iterative cycle allows us to fine-tune and to learn about the questions and answers we seek to share as part of our making process. Ken will now describe the technological proof of concept that was one of the items on which we received feedback during the charrette.
So what we're doing here in this demo is bringing to life our digital resources from the Dodd archives here at the university. These papers are donated to by the Dodd family to the university and are the personal notes and documents of Dodd from the trial. And one really fascinating thing here is that many of these documents, they're written on paper that can't really stand up to consistent use. So, paper was scarce at the end of the war, and what we're looking at is a person handling documents in a VR environment that are dynamically called from the database. So we ask the internet, hey, what is this object, and bring it in. Now, I'd like to make clear that this rendition of the courtroom is as it appears now when we visited, and it's still in a very early stage of development. So this might not be the final look. It might look much more different than this. But to begin somewhere, we started with our 3D scans that we produced when we visited Nuremberg and the memoriam there. So traditionally, if you're looking at these documents, you'd be using the Internet Archive, which is a word searchable database and also includes other digital collections like the Maurice Sendak collection. The other way you might engage with these documents is through analog facsimiles. So essentially paper printouts of the originals, which remain secure in the archive so that they don't become further damaged. But because of these protective measures, we've kind of lost, I think, a tactility of a document, the size and shape and how it opens and folds, or maybe it's a book and flips around. So part of this project is thinking about the feel of the experience and returning to maybe a more potentially authentic version of the way we used to look at documents in real life by using virtual reality. So you can flip documents over, they flop around like a sheet of paper might, sunlight beams through the piece of paper, and there's physical heft to the books as well. Although this current iteration has users putting objects on a pedestal to initiate video that we see on the movie screen, this is an early experiment with the idea that objects can embody a story and help us narratively transport users to certain scenes and contexts within the experience. And the neat thing about the fetching multimedia from the internet is that technically we could do that to any kind of media from any website or database and render it within the VR world. As well as that, we can pull relevant metadata that's provided on the website already into the experience, which you can see kind of rendered on the white screen as we pick up different objects. All that metadata is there, the name and tags for it. Potentially, this could provide a framework for the development of other projects dealing with large online databases and provide a set of users to crowdsource things like OCR cleanup or meta tagging in the documents, photos, and videos within any collection.
I'd like to share with you now some of the ways in which our iterative design process has changed our thinking about the project. In the beginning, we conceived of the learner's experience as that of a member of the prosecutorial team examining documentation and evidence and building their case against a specific defendant. Approaching the experience as a type of historical reenactment brought with it several issues. There was, of course, a high expectation of strict adherence to precisely what was known, said, and occurred at the time of the major war crimes trial. This not only worked against our goal to communicate that IMT and Holocaust histories are active areas of ongoing research and discovery, It also limited our interest as a team in taking the learner outside the courtroom to more fully connect them to civilian populations, events, and places discussed at the trial. Additionally, the wide availability of archival footage from the courtroom proceedings, as well as documentary works, meant that there were easier ways for learners to see what the trial was all about. Additionally, the emphasis that any trial places on the perpetrators as the center of attention and the definitive verdicts made it difficult for us to structure an authentic history-based learning experience where learners maintained agencies and their actions influence outcomes. In terms of agency, an ethical barrier that we will not cross is allowing the outcomes of the trials to be altered or opening up the centering of perpetrators to a kind of false glorification of these individuals. So we return to our learning objective, to introduce basic methods of historical inquiry using primary sources to foster critical thinking. In the beginning of the experience, the learner is presented with several objects, primary sources. Driven by their own interests, they will choose one. The system will lead them through a discern sequence, prompting the learner with a series of basic questions, much like those an educator uses when teaching someone how to work with various types of primary sources. If it's a photograph, a certain question sequence will be enacted. Likewise, a map or an oral history. Successful answers unlock more information about the item. When the learner reaches a certain level, they will be able to travel. This means they will choose from a menu what broader questions about the object and its context they would like to investigate. Some travel quests might allow the learner to travel to a present-day location, such as the museum where the actual object is now held, or to a location situated in the past that is part of the object's evidentiary story. It is this interactive, immersive sense of movement and encounter that is a fundamental strength of headset VR as a history-telling and learning medium. Returning from the travel, the learner enters a sequence of reflection. There are two types, formative and summative. The formative reflection allows them to think about what they have learned on their collect, discern, travel sequence. And after successfully completing a reflection, they will then be able to start back and collect a new object and continue their journey. A practical concern that VR time travel raises is how it might impact the learner's historical understanding. As we know, material culture has complex life stories. Take, for example, a document produced during the time of the trial, or a German occupation currency note minted in 1942, but not recovered until archaeology in 2005, and an oral history which reflects on events of 1942 but was not recorded until 1991. Objects have more than one time period associated with them, and to help keep the learner oriented, we came up with an organizational device called the Collections Board. Think of it as a smart bulletin board, where as the learner places these various objects on it, highlighted information appears that speaks to the origin date of a particular item, discovery date, geographical origin, geographical mentions, as well as where the object resides now. The collections board will also provide thematic connections between different objects that together tell a more complex story about the period. Identity is also an issue that we're thinking through carefully. Who is the individual coming into the experience? They might be the child or the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. They might be a high school or college student who has only read or learned about the Holocaust in class. We made the decision that the learner should remain themselves in the experience. They will not inhabit a fictional character. Rather, as themselves, they will be transported through the experience and tasked with collecting and examining primary source evidence, encountering moments of contextualization as they learn about the history. Then, as they exit the virtual realm and return to their daily lives, they have a sense of carrying their learnings with them rather than leaving them behind with that fictional character that they had inhabited. Proximity is an issue of embodiment that is also being taken into consideration. We know that the active courtroom was an extremely crowded place, and while transporting the learner into a densely populated space might be productive to give them a sense of the historical moment, to leave them feeling psychosomatically hemmed in and confined would be counterproductive to our learning objectives. In terms of proximity, we also have to think about their agency of movement. What might it be like for certain learners to be able to move close to a defendant, to regard them face to face, and to have that sense of mutual embodiment? This brings us to the issue of representation, a topic familiar to all who work in any area of Holocaust history. Let us talk briefly about the issue of representing perpetrators, whether they were defendants in the courtroom or historical actors elsewhere during the period. As mentioned, we are not striving for highly realistic reenactment. The decision we have made as we take inspiration from courtroom artists and think about the different types of aesthetic treatments that can separate the perpetrator from the learner and from characters in the space who might function as guides and aids to the learner, such as a museum curator character or an archivist, is that the perpetrators and their regalia will only appear as they did during that period in the carefully chosen primary sources that are integrated into the experience. Outside of this historic record, our goal is to render the perpetrators as silhouettes, shadows that have the bearing of existing only as a trace when they are outside the historical record. This representation denies the perpetrator's equal presence to that of the learner and other characters that will exist in fuller three-dimensional detail. As we enter into our next phase of work, we're embracing an open notebook humanities philosophy. On our Greenhouse Studios website, we will begin sharing more frequently our process, its documentation, and the discussions that we're having about these and other issues and the technology as well. We'd like to thank you today for giving us time to talk about our work, and we look forward to hearing from you and having discussions about the digitalization of memory.
Thank you, Clarissa and Ken. Our next point on the agenda is a presentation by the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, who will provide a look into the Anne Frank video diary.
Hello and welcome. My name is Femke and I'm a trainer and an educator at the Anne Frank House. And as you can see, I'm working from home, as most of you. Our museum is closed since half of December last year due to COVID-19, which is a negative development. But for me personally, a positive development is that I've learned a lot on digital possibilities. So yeah, it's also nice to give this presentation online. I've learned a lot the last year, or yeah, the last. I was one of the developers of the video diary of Anne Frank, a series of 15 episodes together with 7 educational episodes where the life story of Anne Frank is filmed by a young actress that plays the role of Anne. And instead of writing a diary, she actually films the events that she witnessed during Nazi occupation and the events in the back house on the Prinsengracht number 263 in Amsterdam, the place where she and 7 others were in hiding. Now, I was asked to tell you something about this digital educational project and how you as educators can actually use this project in your practice. So the next 20 minutes, I will tell you something about the background and about the motivation. Why did we develop this project? I will show you some of the content. So we will watch 1 episode and we will also watch 1 educational episode. And I will show you some of the educational material that was developed with it and the possibilities that you have and how you can use this online. Now, I thought it would be nice to start with watching the first episode. It's called My Best Present. Before I will go more into depth, it's nice for you to see this video. So just have a look and yeah, see what you think of it, and then we'll go further into depth.
Het is heel raar.
Op jou, Anne?
Je neus lijkt nu op een aardbei.
Oh.
Het is een mooi apparaat, hoor.
Je bent er trots op, hè?
Ja, ik vind hem echt heel mooi. Ik zou hem zelf ook wel willen hebben, eigenlijk.
Hallo. Hey, Moortje. Kijk eens naar de camera. Dit is Jacqueline, een van mijn beste vriendinnen. Annelie. Iets meer lopen als een model, hoor. Niet te veel, natuurlijk. Nee, maar jeetje. En ook... Langzaam mee. Oh.
Anne, doe die camera weg.
Het is dus oorlog. En de Duitsers die in 1940 aan de macht zijn gekomen, hebben steeds meer anti-Joodse maatregelen genomen. Zoals Joodse sterren die we op moeten doen op onze kleding. En we moeten naar speciale scholen voor Joden. Papa mag niet meer zijn eigen bedrijf hebben. Nu sturen ze dus ook brieven naar Joodse mensen. En erin staat dat ze zich moeten gaan melden om te gaan werken in Duitsland. Mijn geloof heeft er ook eentje gekregen. En we gaan morgen onderduiken. En ik ben gewoon bang. Ik weet gewoon, we gaan morgen weg. En ik weet niet waar we heen gaan. Het is zo fijn dat ik het aan iemand kan vertellen. Ik weet gewoon niet wat er allemaal gaat gebeuren. Maartje, nee schatje. Ik ga je missen. Ik ga je snel weer zien. Ik hou van je. Anne, kom hier. Het komt goed. Ik kom snel weer terug. Anne, kom.
Ja.
Hoe lang nog?
Een uur lopen.
I've chosen this video because I think it sets the ambience. It's the beginning of Anne Frank as a writer. It's the beginning of the period that they went into hiding, and it gives you a good idea of what these videos are about. You've seen them, or you've seen one of them now, and I'd like you to think of one word. It could be an emotion, or just think of one word, take a moment that this video evokes. What did you see? What do you think? I do this short exercise so you can reflect for yourself on what you've seen. Maybe this is a new project for you. For me personally, I've seen the videos many times, but sometimes I still feel overwhelmed by the power of a video. Luna Perez, the actress that plays Anne, she does a great job, and she directly involves you as a viewer into her story. And that's, for me personally, different from reading a book. And often we hear from viewers that they are impressed, that they feel sadness, that they feel excitement, that they are curious of the next episodes. But that's for everyone personal. Now, how was this project realized? I will tell you a little bit about the background. This project was a cooperation between the Anne Frank House and Every Media, a media production company in Amsterdam. And Every Media was inspired by a project that was done in Israel. It was called Eva's Stories, a series of Instagram posts based on the story of Eva. And they were inspired by this project, and they thought maybe we could also do something like this, but then with the example that most people in the Netherlands and actually worldwide know the life story of Anne Frank. And we as the Anne Frank House have the mission to make the life story of Anne Frank familiar, especially with young adults. And we are always trying to find new ways, appealing ways of telling this story and to stay in contact with young adults. So this ended up in a really nice cooperation together, where Every Media was responsible for the script writing and the filming, and the Anne Frank House was responsible for the accuracy and for the educational extras that I will tell you more about later. How was this done? We rebuilt the whole back house. This was a whole new world opened up to me, because we were cooperating with a team that were in charge of looking for props, so making or taking care that this whole film set would look exactly like the back house back then, including furniture and even including packages of cigarettes. They found them somewhere on a marketplace at somebody's attic that actually kept cigarettes from the 30s. So yeah, as I said, a whole new world opened up for me too, that people actually keep these things. But it was really worthwhile because it made it really authentic. It was as if you were traveling in time when you were on this film set. We filmed there for 1 month with Luna, who played the main role of Anne, and we broadcasted the episodes weekly on YouTube. We choose YouTube because it's the major media platform that young adults use nowadays. And the series was launched last year, actually on the day that our country went into lockdown, on the 16th of March. And then weekly, we broadcasted episodes until the 5th of May, the day of liberation in the Netherlands. So it's 15 episodes. You've already seen one, the first one. And as I said before, instead of writing a diary, Anne is using a camera, and she addresses to her viewers directly. Here you can see an overview of the 15 episodes and the titles. And where you see the little stars, those are the episodes that we also translated into an educational episode. We call them educational extras or educational videos. Altogether, there are 7. And before I discuss these educational extras, I'm going to show you one. The one that connects to the first one you've already seen. So you've seen My Best Present, and we filtered out a subject out of this video, and we made an educational video called Discrimination. So we will have a look at that now.
Hier, op nummer 37 2 hoog, woonde Anne Frank samen met haar zus en haar ouders voordat ze gingen onderduiken. En jij en ik, wij kunnen hier vrij rondlopen, eigenlijk gaan en staan waar we willen. Maar dat is niet altijd zo geweest voor iedereen.
Want onder Adolf Hitler werden Joden apart gezet en gediscrimineerd. Maar hoe werkte dat? En wat betekende dat voor Anne? We weten allemaal dat Anne Frank een dagboek bijhield. Maar stel je voor dat ze een videocamera had gehad. Dit is Luna en zij speelt Anne in de serie. En ik ben Femke en ik vertel je graag meer over Anne's wereld. Op 10 mei 1940 valt het Duitse leger Nederland binnen en grijpen de nazi's de macht. In Nederland wonen op dat moment 140.000 Joden. Daarvan duiken er zo'n 28.000 tijdens de Tweede Wereldoorlog onder. Onder hen ook de familie Frank. Er zitten 8 mensen ondergedoken in het achterhuis. Otto, Edith, Margot en Anne Frank. Otto's medewerker Herman van Pels met zijn vrouw Auguste en hun zoon Peter. En een kennis van hen, Frits Pfeffer.
De Duitsers hebben steeds meer anti-Joodse maatregelen genomen. Zoals de Joodse sterren. En we moeten naar speciale scholen voor Joden.
De nazi's die voerden de anti-Joodse maatregelen niet in één keer in. Dat deden ze heel venijnig, stap voor stap.
De eerste maatregel die ik me herinner was dat we niet naar parken en naar zwembaden mochten. Hoewel we nog niet herkenbaar waren. Een paar maanden later met een ster op was het natuurlijk onmogelijk.
Er wordt dus geleidelijk een hele rits aan verboden ingevoerd. Joden worden ontslagen bij de overheden, bij de gemeente, bij universiteiten. Joden moeten naar scholen voor Joden, mogen niet meer naar het zwembad en het museum. Ze mogen niet meer naar winkels, concerten, de bioscoop en noem maar op.
Joden mochten op een goed moment alleen nog maar tussen 3 en 5 's middags boodschappen doen. Dat betekende bij de groentewinkel dat alleen de verlepte groente er nog was.
Zo worden Joden als tweederangs burgers behandeld en alles is erop gericht om hen apart te zetten en buiten te sluiten.
Ik ben in het Anne Frankhuis en ik sta hier bij wel een heel bijzondere kaart. Deze kaart is namelijk in mei 1941 in opdracht van de nazi's, maar door Nederlandse ambtenaren gemaakt. Elke stip is 10 Joden. Het laat ons zien hoe systematisch de nazi's te werk gingen. Het brengt precies in beeld waar Joden wonen. En dat komt de nazi's natuurlijk wel heel goed uit wanneer ze een jaar later beginnen met het oppakken van Joden. En dan, op 5 juli 1942, wanneer Margot pas 16 jaar is, dan krijgt ze hier thuis een oproep. Ze moet zich melden bij de nazi's om te gaan werken in een werkkamp in het door Nazi-Duitsland bezette Oost-Europa.
Otto en Edith Frank vertrouwen de nazi's voor geen cent en besluiten de volgende dag te gaan onderduiken.
Hier, in het achterhuis aan de Prinsengracht in het centrum van Amsterdam.
Het kantoorpand van het bedrijf van Otto Frank. Al een flinke tijd zijn ze met enkele helpers bezig het pand klaar te maken voor de onderduik. Met meubels, spullen en voedsel. Na Margot's oproep zien zij geen andere uitweg meer dan zich hier te verschuilen.
Benauwd, moet de muis stil zijn en iedere dag de angst om ontdekt te worden. Anne die gaat naar binnen als ze 13 is en ze komt dus pas weer naar buiten als ze 15 is. Op de dag dat de onderduikers worden ontdekt en opgepakt.
Joden werden gediscrimineerd en dat had verschrikkelijke gevolgen. En dan nu de vraag voor jou.
We leven nu in een andere tijd. Maar wordt er nog steeds gediscrimineerd? En door wie?
So you've seen the extra, and as you saw, there was a question asked. The question was, people are still being discriminated against today. Who are those people and who is responsible for discrimination today? Now, I would like you to think about how would you discuss this question with your students. These questions, every educational episode ends with a reflection question, and they are they have the primary goal of starting a discussion. For me, or a question to you is, how would you discuss this question in your classroom? Would you do this in pairs? Would you moderate the discussion? Would you let them write a testimonial or make a short video maybe? How could you do this? So, to give you the overview of the educational extras, I will quickly tell you something of how we develop these educational extras. What we did is we had a look at the whole episode series, these 15 episodes of the video diary, and together with teachers, together with other educational professionals that deal with the topic of the Holocaust in their practice. And we had a look and thought, what story is not being told? So, for example, in the first episode, you see that Anne is going into hiding. She is walking to the hiding place, and that's also where the video stops. But it doesn't tell us anything about why she went into hiding. What was going on in the world around her that she and her family needed to go into hiding. And what we try to do is, in the educational extra, we try to answer these questions. So that's where the educational extra discrimination needs to support the first episode. And we developed 7. First one you saw on discrimination. There's one on Anne's diary, and as a writer. There's one on the mechanism of scapegoating. It answers to the question, where does discrimination start? There's one on making choices. It's on the role of the helper. It discusses the many roles that there were of being a perpetrator, being a victim, being a bystander. But we zoom in on the role of the helper because, as you know, this is quite a sad story. It's not a happy ending. But we as the Anne Frank House find it very important that besides telling this story of sadness, you also show young adults positive examples of people that helped others. So I'd like to stress that we find that very important to also give these positive stories to inspire young adults. There's one on freedom. There is one on identity. It's on Anne's identity questions that she has. In the back house, she feels, besides being very alone, being the youngest one, she doesn't recognize herself in what others think of her. So, for example, this educational extra ends with the question, how do you actually perceive yourself? And does this match with how other people see you? And then the last one is the relevance for today. So it asks the question, name one message or one thing that you've learned from the life story of Anne Frank. So, to sum up, there's 15 video diary episodes, 7 educational videos. They are also to be found on YouTube. You could watch them for free, and they are all translated into, I believe, 5 languages: English, German, Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese, subtitled. Then we've also developed educational material with this video project. They are to be found on our website, www.annefrank.org. And there you can, I can show you by sharing. And if you go to English, you go to Education portal, and here you see all our material. If you are interested, we have many online tools that you can use. Here you can navigate. Here you already see Anne Frank video diary in the classroom primary education. Here is all the extras are to be also found here or on YouTube, and you can download a workbook. This one is actually for the age 10 to 12, and it's a folding book. So you would need to print it, and they can make it into a little book, fold it into a little book, and then they are asked to answer questions about the series and about the educational extras. And we are still working on the secondary school educational material. Let's see, I'd like to show you. Yeah, this is not being translated into, sorry, sometimes I feel like I'm a dinosaur from another era that I cannot even navigate on my own website that I should know. But here it's in Dutch. I know you cannot understand it, but I will explain to you. Here you will find the educational material for a secondary school. So that's like 13, 14 plus. We've also heard from other teachers that educate older students, age 16, that it's also easy to use. So I must say extensive research needs to be done on the use of the material before we can improve and translate it. Because here, I'd like to just give you an idea of what this material looks like. In this year, the planning is that we're going to translate it at least into English, so that, yeah, it's free of use, of course, also for all our partners and people that are interested. Here you could download the working sheets, which you can fill out online. Here you see, you could just type. So we did this because we were confronted with the Corona situation, where all of a sudden the students had to learn at home because the schools closed. But in this way, they could still make their homework at home online. Every working sheet starts with watching the episode and the extra, analyzing historical sources, making a group assignment, and the last exercise is reflecting up on the reflection question. But as I said, this still needs to be translated into English. We found this very important, this second part of making these educational videos, justifying the project, because I must say, when I first heard about the project, when I was involved, I was a little bit in doubt. I thought, whoa, we need to be aware that we're not going to rewrite history. We need to be very cautious. It's a sensitive topic, and you don't want students in the end to think that Anne had a camera in that time and that she was videotaping herself. No, she wrote a diary. So what we try to do with these educational extras and also with this material is we go back to the real sources. We use interviews of survivors. You already saw that in the extra discrimination. The people that tell what this discrimination did to them. We use sources, primary sources, witness accounts, diary entries, real pictures to justify the project and to show students that this is a real story. my last words I will direct to you to sum up. What is this material about, or what does it contain? It's a series of 15 episodes to be found on YouTube, together with a series of 7 educational episodes also to be found on YouTube, and educational material for primary schools, which are already translated into English, to be found on our website annefrank.nl. And the educational material for the secondary school classes will be translated into English this year. Now, to close off, as the Anne Frank House, we are always keen and curious to keep on learning ourselves. So please start using the videos and let us know what your experience is, your reactions that you have from students, suggestions for improvement, critical questions that you have, that are all welcome. Please let us know. It's you can send this to docenten@annefrank.nl. And yeah, start using the videos. If you find them useful, share them in your network, and enjoy the rest of this online conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then we have again deserved to have another break. See you back in about 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I now have the pleasure of introducing the main panel discussion at this seminar. The moderator of the panel discussion will be Mr. Per Gynge, who will introduce himself and the other participants in the panel discussion. Welcome, Per.
Hello, everybody on the internet and on our screens in front of me. My name is Per. I've been a journalist. I've worked with museum technology, and today I'm a communications advisor and ever so often a critic. I hope to have all those bits and pieces from my past and present when discussing with our three distinguished guests. From my left, on the first screen to my left, is Tabea Wiedemann from the University of Konstanz. Then we have Stephanie Bilib representing Bergen-Belsen Memorial. And Victoria, hello to you. And to my right is Victoria Walden from the University of Sussex. Now, I know it's very hard for academics to keep it brief, but if we start with you, Tabea, if you introduce yourself in one sentence, is it possible to relate yourself to the topic?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
so
good.
I'm a PhD candidate
Yeah.
at the University of Konstanz, and my dissertation focuses on digital games as memory media about the Holocaust, and I try to focus the act of playing as an act of witnessing.
That is absolutely something that we are going to discuss. And Stephanie?
I'm doing communications for the Bergen-Belsen Memorial, and I'm also head of the project on digital approaches. Let's put it like that.
And Victoria?
I'm a senior lecturer in media studies at Sussex, and my work focuses on thinking about what is particular about digital culture and how that can inform Holocaust memory.
Now, the title for this session is Holocaust Remembrance in a Digital Future Towards Deep Truth or Deep Fake. Now, speaking of digital future, we're sitting here like this. If we were to rewind 1 year, I guess none of us would imagine sitting like this, talking to screens through digital means. Now, relating to the subject, has the virus and the crisis changed the way we think about this subject, or the need to discuss this subject, do you think? Let's start with Tabea.
Well, I certainly do. So for me, two aspects come to mind. I think, you know, us now using digital media more intensely in our everyday life, or for a bigger part of the population, I think maybe it has changed the notion of the sphere as being something we escape into or use to be entertained or something, but we perceive it as a sphere where meaningful exchange and new ideas can develop and can happen.
So it's more normalized, in a sense?
In a sense, yes. But on the other hand, I think it also shows, especially with COVID, so I don't know about other countries, but in the German country especially, many people that doubt, you know, the pandemic and have different opinions, sometimes they reintroduce Holocaust memory, or they draw comparisons to, you know, this is a dictatorship, we are victimized. Right. So they introduce the discourse again into something very different. And I think in the digital sphere, they can mingle so easily, and it shows how relevant it is to continue to talk about it. So it gets reintroduced in COVID quite extremely.
I think one of the problems, though, with the pandemic is, I think, in one hand, media scholars have been writing about the idea of kind of media life and the ubiquity of media and the digital around us all the time for probably about 10, 15 years now. But I think we're more aware of it. But I think that we've kind of jumped onto things like Zoom or Teams or Padlet without having the kind of taking a step back to think about being critical about those media and those cultures. So allowing certain kind of corporations to dominate how we communicate, and the surveillance aspect of, well, what's happening to our data. So I think we've been very kind of overzealous in engaging with that. And I think it's kind of really important for Holocaust institutions to think about their role in that, given the work that we're all doing about genocide and human rights, education, then being complicit in the way data manipulation is used in politics by engaging in particular platforms might be something that we want to untangle more and think about more.
Now, comedy equals tragedy plus time is a popular quote deriving from American humorist and author Mark Twain. Now, through popular culture, we've experienced a variety of representations of the Holocaust. Now, where I am sitting at Falstad, it is a dramatic setting of a hit novel and now play from 2018 called Keep Saying Their Names by Norwegian author Simon Stranger. Yes, you nod, you perhaps heard of it. It's been translated into 25 languages so far. Now, in this book and the play, real witnesses are turned into fictional characters with a mix of documentary realism as well as storytelling, even counterfactual storytelling. Does examples like this show us that any expression of the Holocaust is approved today? Let's start with Stephanie. Didn't get to say anything.
Well, this is what I feel.
It's a big question.
I don't think that anything is possible, but the question is rather, what can we imagine? And we have to try a few things. I would say we have to try out to make sure whether we think they're okay or not. I would say usually you have a feeling about something, and then you either go ahead or you think, no, maybe not.
Yeah, but what stops you?
Like, for example, when we discuss digital approaches at Bergen-Belsen, and our development partners, they often go like, in this reconstruction, there are no characters, there are no people there. Why can't you imagine to put people in there? And then I feel like, well, you know, as long as we are actually researching the real victims' names and personal data, I don't feel comfortable with putting creative fictional characters into these settings. But that's just one aspect.
Do you agree, Tabea and Vicky?
Well, I would certainly agree with Stephanie. It's so important, or I think the line, maybe this blurry line between being close and being too close is the danger that, of course, we have to find new expressions of touching people. So communicating, it's meaningful to remember, and why to remember. But at the same time, with this immersive entertainment or fascination, maybe even, I believe there's a danger that all these fictionalized stories that are just told well, but might start covering up the voices of the victims and of the people that we try to, you know, give the space here and try to let them remember. But on the other hand, I think it can help, you know, once in a while to across this mental border of what is right or wrong, exactly to put the finger on it and to reflect upon what do we perceive as something right or wrong? Why do you feel maybe uncomfortable with something? And how can, you know, how to reintroduce these negotiations that we also don't become too comfortable with our position to say this is the right way and it will always be the right way, but just always to reflect, is it really?
I think what Stephanie was saying about, you know, within a kind of museum or memory site context, thinking about what you feel as the experts in the field is correct for that kind of context is really important. But I think, you know, with a lot of fiction and comedy, what happens is kind of, there's a certain group of people who decide what should or shouldn't be approved. And we saw this with Life is Beautiful. We saw it recently with the Holocaust Challenge on TikTok and the Amazon series Hunters, and some computer games as well. And my kind of worry is that when we shut the door on people and say your expression and your memory is not welcome, where do they go? Because Holocaust deniers and people that distort the Holocaust are really welcoming of people into their community. It's like, come listen to us, we'll take you in, we're not like that. And I think that we should always start with an open door and imagine that, you know, what happens if we bring together all the people with Holocaust history and expertise and all these people trying who have the will and the interest and sometimes the media expertise to distribute and produce stuff, whether they're amateurs or professionals, and bring those people together and start a dialogue around kind of, you know, why do you think that's appropriate rather than it's not. why did you do that? And I think that would open up lots of really fruitful ideas of how to take Holocaust memory forward.
Now, you mentioned La Vita è Bella, and recent examples like Jojo Rabbit is also an example of that. So you could laugh, even though it's a very disturbing subject. Now, does examples like that show that time is the enabler, or just that we've just pushed boundaries so that now we have to take humor into consideration?
I think humor's always been there.
You think?
Ghetto humor was a form of survival strategy during the Holocaust for people. And I think laughter is a complicated response. Some people laugh when they're stressed or traumatized. And in some of the kind of projects that have been deemed kind of funny or inappropriate in some way or another, there's often a personal connection between the creator and Jewish identity, or the Holocaust very specifically. And that becomes a personal or a specifically cultural way, in a familiar way, to think about complex transgenerational trauma for those people. And then people outside who don't know about that intent kind of criticize it just because it's comedy. I think there can be bad Holocaust comedies, there could be good Holocaust comedies, but again, it's just different people have different tastes and different judgments on things.
So to sum up, are there any boundaries not to cross in terms of narrative or technology, or must we just judge each case of use separately?
Well, I think, of course, I believe we have mental boundaries. Maybe they differ individually, but of course, the way we're brought up, we're taught about the topic, I think just naturally everyone has a certain perspective on it. But I do not believe that these boundaries should not be crossed at all, but rather that when we cross them, we should do so reflectively and in a way of giving meaning to why we cross them. For example, to start a new negotiation, or also just to maybe to break open our idea of what is a memory medium and suddenly, for example, introducing a new medium. So just to keep this fluid and vivid and changing, because that's our idea. We want Holocaust memory to be vivid and to be lived and to be shared. But we can only do that if people, feel connected to it and find a place for it in their everyday lives.
Absolutely. Especially from the memorials perspective, I would say we have to be aware that we who create who do exhibitions and do educational programs at the memorial today, we are of a certain age, and how we bring across the subject is the way we are accustomed to maybe approaching it. But we have to realize that younger people are used to completely different approaches. So why should we not try to go that way as well?
Is that hard? Is sort of like a cultural delay that you're sort of? Do you think you are more conservative than the younger audiences?
I don't know. I think that's just a natural way. I mean, I grew up reading a lot, so I approach things very often through reading something. But today, I mean, I didn't grow up with a smartphone in my hand, but I don't know, teenagers today simply have different approaches. I don't know if that really is a question of being conservative.
No. Now, yeah.
I think also, sorry, with the age thing, I think one of the things that's come up with the pandemic is our kind of assumptions about the kind of digital native and the young person as kind of savvy in the digital world is actually, those of us who are teaching know this is very much not true, that it's Holocaust survivors that are jumping on live streams and Zoom and wanting to be on YouTube, and students often saying, how do I log into Zoom? I don't quite understand how this site works or this Padlet works, or and just because young people are surrounded by images doesn't mean they have a kind of critical engagement or a kind of literacy of how to use this. And part of Holocaust education, I know the Yossi Shoah Foundation is doing quite a lot of work on this, is about doing digital literacy with Holocaust education, and I think that's quite important there.
Now, through narratives like Schindler's List, they gave us sort of the mind of Amund Goethe, and the book I mentioned, Keep Saying Their Names, sort of personalizes the war criminal Henry Rinnan, who grew up not far from here. Is there any learning in entering such minds through, say, a computer game? Or is it a danger to humanize them, do you think?
Well, since you mentioned computer games,
yeah,
right away, just take a liberty.
That was for you. Yeah.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, well, I do believe it's very important not to, dip further into this schematized sphere or narratives of the good ones and the bad ones, and dehumanizing the perpetrators, as I said before. For example, this game I talked about in my keynote, My Memory of Us, a Polish independent game, and I think the idea is quite enchanting a bit, talking in fairy tale mode, or creating this obviously distorted version of the past through which it's possible to talk about the past. But what I see very critically here is that they introduce the perpetrators as robots, as a robot army, so that it's clearly inhumane. And I think this is the danger, exactly, creating monsters, demons, and just labeling them. Of course, they're demons. It's a demon. You can see it's evil. But just this evilness, or the things that happened in the past were created by humans, and that has to be acknowledged. And I think it's very important to dip into this further.
Ernst van Alpine said a really provocative and I think really important statement about Holocaust education, that what do we learn from empathizing with victims? That we could maybe be a victim one day, that it would be awful to be a victim and we might be traumatized. And he suggested it would be much more powerful to think about identifying with perpetrators. What are the choices that people make that makes them step that line between thinking they're incredibly moral human beings, maybe then becoming a bystander, becoming a perpetrator? Because not everyone was just outright anti-Semitic and an outright Nazi supporter who became a perpetrator during World War II and during the Holocaust. And I think that's a really important aspect, and the survivor narratives are really important, and we should listen to them and learn about the victim experience. But as Tabea said, like the humanness of the perpetrators is something we have a choice over in our future. We have a choice whether we become victims. We certainly have choices about where we stand and how we respond to violence.
Stephanie, your thumb was up.
Yeah, I agree to that, because that's what we experience also in our educational programs. You start, of course, at Bergen-Belsen, as in many other memorial sites, we tell the story of this site from the victim's perspective, because this is the respectful way, I would say. And so we do. And then at some point you just end up hearing about these victims, and you start like, well, now what do I do with this? And when you start, well, how can I what can I do to prevent this situation happening again? Then you ask for something, how can I act? And then you realize, well, okay, there are many occasions when you can decide on going this way or that way. And so this aspect of acting and deciding in a responsible way, that takes you much rather to the perpetrator side than to the victim side. And that's why seeing also how did these people in the past go their path and what did they decide at what point, that's quite helpful, I would say, yes.
In what way is it helpful?
Well, because you perhaps you can see patterns.
Yeah.
Because you can, maybe you see, well, one of the rather famous persons for Bergen-Belsen is Irma Grese, a female guard who came from Auschwitz. And you would say, well, she was not educated. And for her, going to the SS provided a secure income, a career, options for a career, respectability. And so there are certain aspects that you could see and say, well, okay, what do you need? Why does it take me now?
Is it sort of, you can relate it to your own life?
Yeah, of course.
And I believe maybe piling on that, I think it's also quite dangerous, when we talk about Nazism or the systematic murder during the Holocaust. If you talk about a system that leaves out the people involved with the system, maybe that's a danger here, because somehow it appears as if the victims fell or became victims of something that just happened out of nowhere. And I think it's also maybe a danger, when we talk about memory discourses and how will the digitalization of memory develop. I think maybe the way to talk about it leaves out the agents and the actors that have their own motivation, and they do something and something is happening, and through these deeds or these involvements, that's how things change. So that's maybe what I'd like to add to Stephanie.
And I think there's a great potential there for computer games, and thinking about the kind of interactive branching narrative development that that are characteristic of computer games and other forms of interactive digital storytelling enable this kind of thing. And you could do some kind of data aggregation of the different choices different people make and the characters they think they are, and you can get to a sense of the different kinds of choices players would make and collect. There's some really interesting research you could do by working with computer games more seriously around this.
But do you find that it's sort of uncomplicated to say have a computer game and you being Eichmann or Amund Goethe or Henry Rinnan in that computer game? Does that will there be an extra need for some kind of context for the user, or should they just play and be them?
I don't think you necessarily have to role play particular historical characters, and I think that's been one of the kind of fears of computer games, that people will reenact history and play it wrong, and it won't be the correct history and it will be distortion. If you're not playing history but you're playing a role, like an example of a young German woman who hasn't got much schooling, and thinking about her choices, that it's a kind of a trope individual, a character that's built up exploring this space. Attendant 1942 is a Czech game that Tabea wonderfully introduced me to a while ago, and in that there's an encyclopedia that pops up. So when certain places or events are mentioned, you start to reveal encyclopedia entries, and you learn about the real history that your fictional game is kind of touching on. And I think that's a really good way of mixing the kind of history and the fiction.
But that's where you put it into a context where you actually learn something as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I would just, that contextualization is very, very important. Thank you, Vicky, before for introducing Van Alphen and his idea of, how could this perpetrator's perspective, especially in games, help, to create maybe shock moments where people learn from. I started to think about this game, Cassette Manager, that has reappeared very often, and from the neo-fascist movements, where you manage your own cassette. And of course, it would be devastating just to let people play it without any background. But what I find more and more intriguing is it has within this game, you see certain imaginations about what a cassette would be like as a place of an economic system that is happening there, and that is a narrative, and an important narrative, what we think about cassettes and the way what's happened in these places of atrocity. Moreover, you have now then the memorial sites to go there and confront the different versions, so to speak.
Okay, so this is sort of for those who haven't been introduced to this game. Is it sort of like a Sim City for cassette managers, or what?
It's it has reappeared. I think it's around since the 80s, and it pops up just somewhere on the internet on servers, and it's exactly so. As far as I'm aware of it, I haven't played it myself. No. I have to admit, it's like a economic simulation where you have to keep your cassette running and where you have to keep your workers working, but on the other hand, if they use up too many of your resources, you have to decide who to kill. So it's actually, again, it's very economic. It's just numbers and symbols as far as I know. So you don't have a perspective, you don't have a first person, you don't have any narrative about it. It's just that. And of course, again, I'm not promoting people to play this game, but I think it's important to look at what narratives are there. Yeah. How is it functioning? What idea does it present to ourselves? And how can this create maybe a shock moment to people when they're suddenly confronted with, oh, there is this idea outside. Okay, how do I react? How do I feel about it? To start reflections going.
What are those shock moments? What kind of moments could that be? Sort of that yeah, Stephanie?
It just reminded me of a moment or a situation I found myself a few years ago when I had a visitor who was actually a member of the police, and he was very interested in our reconstruction. So we went outside, and being from the police, he had a certain perspective, and he suddenly started asking me, what about the guards here in Bergen-Belsen? What was their life? I mean, did they work in shifts? How many people were on one watchtower? And I realized, okay, I don't know. So let's try to imagine something, and let's see. Then also in this reconstruction, I found it very fascinating to go and take the perspective from the watchtower inside or into the camp, and then realizing, okay, what does it mean to be in this position for I don't know how many hours, because this is now my shift, and how do I suddenly to take this position unexpectedly, and that made me, it really hit me, and it felt like, okay. And also there are moments of deciding whether I shoot somebody because I'm bored or because he comes closer to the fence or whatever. But you see these things from a different perspective suddenly. At least I did in that moment.
Now, since we are here live, I've got a question. I don't know from whom, but it says, is it possible to implement game into educational process? If yes, then how? Question from Olga. Thank you, Olga.
I think in education, gaming is loved. I saw a meme going around the other day that said, your parents tell you spend too much time gaming, and your teacher tells you that gaming will make you a critical thinker. The education system is being kind of gamified in different ways, and sometimes problematically with kind of competitive quizzes and things. Kahoot is the app everyone loves. And there's a kind of big movement, I think, particularly in German scholarship, around the importance of history games and also serious games. There's lots of games being produced and also VR kind of experiences around human rights issues. And I think we need to kind of not assume that games are a particular kind of game, that every game is not Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto or Tomb Raider. That gaming is a set of different kinds of mechanics and rules that we can use for whatever we want to use.
And you mentioned history games in Germany. Is there any you would like to promote?
So that was more about the scholarship in Germany. People like Felix Zimmermann has been releasing quite a few books. But there's the model, and I forget the name now, but there's a game which has a discovery mode. So it has the kind of fun game. I think you're exploring in one of the versions kind of ancient Egypt, and then you switch into discovery mode and you can go and explore that history space.
Assassin's Creed.
Assassin's Creed, that's the one. Thank you.
And I think I think the huge potential for digital games especially in an educational way, is the way people can feel themselves invested and involved and somehow self-empowered. So the way they experience how history, evolves around them is because they are part of it, and they're taking decisions and they're acting upon their decisions. And I think, isn't that the way we would like future generations to perceive themselves, exactly as responsible actors that can change, that have an influence, whose opinion matters the most, because it will decide on, where we will go with this digitalization of Holocaust memory. And I think just to create this feeling, a sphere of trying it out, is a great educational tool.
Does that make it sort of more alive when you have games that, in its nature is counterfactual, or playing with history as it is? You have counterfactual novels, but certainly you have it in games as well. Are they sort of inspiring us to look at history as something that is alive?
I would say a Holocaust game doesn't have to be about history necessarily. It can be about memory culture.
How?
It can be about having a look at different historical experiences or places and thinking about how you might construct a memory. What's the important things to remember of the Holocaust? You could be, this is just off the, the cuff, a student, and you've got to create a project about the most meaningful things to you about the Holocaust, and you have to go and explore in a gaming space and bring that together. And I'd argue museums are already kind of gaming with the Holocaust. Is the Bowser app that Stephanie has done work, and is that kind of a game in some ways, by exploring sites and looking at different content and making your own journey through both the digital and physical space.
Yes, I would agree to that, to both of you. What we experience, what is very important and what encourages students to engage with this application is that they decide, as Tabea mentioned, I decide where I want to go, what I want to look at, and that helps a lot to raise interest into something, and you go one step further and you look a little deeper, and then you also come back with something that connects to things you know already, or that you're interested in, that you feel emotional about, whatever.
That brings us to the next question. How can it's so hard to say, digitalization bring about a better understanding of the Holocaust to new audiences? Is that what's happened with the Bergen-Belsen app?
I hope so. I don't know.
No, but it does it sort of the fact that you can see places that aren't there physically. Does that sort of bring you as an audience closer to the history? Well, that was a difficult one.
Definitely. I think maybe Stephanie thinks, maybe I give a quick answer of what I think. My problem is with this better, or this idea of something improving.
Oh yeah.
It also comes to my mind, that's what I'm very ambivalent about. Very often we talk about the death of the witnesses in one breath, and then just adding to, and that's why we now need the digitalization of Holocaust memory, in a way as if we have definitely to find substitute ways of, to maintain certain approaches. But I think what Vicky said in the very beginning of the discussion, I think this might give us a very limited perspective of what the digitalization of Holocaust actually can be, or might be, or should be. So in my opinion, it just shows that, introducing it more consciously into the digital sphere means we try to communicate memory via the media that people just use at the moment. It's part of the digitalization of society itself. I'm not sure it's a better way, but it might ensure that, it's still connected to people's lives because it is part of the media they use.
I'd say that the digitization is such a broad term. We have digital testimony, is just testimony being transmitted through digital forms. Being on Facebook or Twitter or Parler when it was still functioning is very different from being an offline app experience at a Holocaust site. They're all digital, but they're completely different experiences in different forms of media. And I think we need to distinguish each individual digital medium and platform as its own, having its own culture and being its own thing, and then thinking about what we can do with that. I'd say one thing about the Balsam project that, I mean, I loved when I saw it, and I keep writing about it because I love it, is it didn't bring me closer to the past. It made me reflect much more on my distance from the past, because the models are not, as Stephanie was saying, it's not a realistic historical representation, and that's purposeful. It's these kind of 3D models, and you go, oh, wow, I'm not there, I'm here, but this is here and that was then, and I'm distant, and I'm aware of my distance and aware of my position as a witness or someone remembering, a kind of non-witness as such. And now I have to think about the difference between the past and present, rather than just looking at the present site and going, a field, there's some markers in the field, there's a memorial here. But you're now something to really be aware of, that there was a past that you can't access and you can't experience, but that was here.
Could you say also that, you know, now that you could use your phone, let's say you have a stumble stone, which is sort of, well, it brought Holocaust to every neighborhood in major cities in Europe. Could it be sort of, although that's analog, that, you know, a digital version could be you know, a museum everywhere approach?
I think there is a digital version of the Stoffelssteiner. There's an app, I think.
Yeah.
I've not used it yet. But I think the USC Shoah Foundation are doing their iWalks, where you can take your phone and see testimony being spoken on your phone at different places. And yeah, I mean, the Holocaust didn't just happen at these big sites. Yeah, lots of people think of Auschwitz as the Holocaust, particularly in the UK. Auschwitz and Belsen is the Holocaust. Anything else is like, oh, I didn't hear about Sachsenhausen or Ravensbrück or Falstad. We didn't hear about any of these other places, or that these, you know, there were boats and hotels being used as concentration camps in cities. And actually, I have the idea that the Holocaust was kind of ever present, really, in Europe and elsewhere as well, with the refugee communities, you know, spread across the world, fleeing Europe. I think it's being able to map and see experiences all over the world would be much more powerful than having to just go to very specific kind of iconic sites.
Now we have another question. I hope I pronounced the name right. From Sitza. Which non-digital older examples were successful in offering historical exploration in an what-if manner? What could digital approaches take from them? I mean, what if, I translate that as counterfactual. That one was difficult as well.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I would say, I can't think of any examples, but me and Stephanie were at a conference, must be 2 years ago now, it's been pre-COVID, in the olden days, as I like to call them. And I just did a kind of, I like to be provocative. I asked a provocative question, you know, all this money we're spending on digital, what if next year, obviously I was definitely not a fortune teller, we had no electricity and we didn't have access to the digital anymore, which is kind of the opposite that's happened. You know, could you do the things that you're doing digitally, non-digitally? Like the ideas of interactivity and immersion and participation are all already there. You know, museums have these kind of almost historical aesthetic spaces, so you kind of feel like you're walking through the ghetto, for example. Yeah, and that's not dissimilar from kind of creating an immersive VR space, but it's much cheaper than creating the immersive VR space. Yeah, I can't think of any particular what-if examples, but I guess that those are the kind of imagining yourself walking through the ghetto, and it's kind of supposed to give you the feeling of how would you feel if this was this enclosed space you were in. I think museums have been doing that for a long time.
I think another, or what I just thought about, which is not an as if experience per se, but you know, oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember the artist's name, was the Lego set, the cassette Lego set, you know, so these toys that suddenly introduced this idea, and which were of course also an artistic project, so that they're framed in a certain way, but still there is this, what if you just pick up this Lego figure and you start playing with it? Or what happens if a child, unaware of the circumstances and the nuances and obviously the references of this absurdity of having suddenly a Lego figure from a cassette, starts playing with it. So there is this, as if suddenly through this playfulness that suddenly arises, is suddenly out there, and is exactly given to the recipient. So what happens, as if maybe that's also an example of where you can feel this ambivalence, or maybe become aware of of these liminal states between what is right and what is wrong, and what is moral and what is immoral.
And in educational context, of course, you have these well, I don't know, games. I think of this experiment, I think in the States in the, I don't know, 70s or whatever. The German title of the book that came out of that was The Wave, where you distinguish between the blue-eyed and the whatever, and the one group has to wear collars around their necks, and so you, what if you suddenly are part of this group and the others are whatever, the othered, alienated.
Now you mention the wave as an example. Now, but in terms of using new ways of exploring narratives or technology, do you feel that museums are ready to sort of jump on new technology, or are they more sort of reluctant, conservative? I mean, is it more difficult for them because they are representing the truth to sort of, you know, go into gamification?
I think that also depends on what country you look at.
Okay.
I would think that, for example, the Netherlands are always very progressive and innovative, or especially also in their museums, while Germany is much more conservative in that respect, I would say. And then among museums, the memorial sites are a specific group in themselves. I would think many of them are hesitant because they feel this is such a sensitive issue. But as Victoria pointed out earlier, it's also a matter of attitude, perhaps, to realize that this is a time right now where we enter a new phase. And if we do not take part in this, then we will lose the opportunity to shape this new, or these next steps.
You say new phase. What does it represent? I mean, why do you say? Is it because the witnesses are dying, or is it the technology, or a mix?
I would say it's a mixture of both, because we are debating this end, the end of the witnesses for, I don't know, 10 years or I don't know how long. And to be honest, in the reality of Bergen-Belsen, the eyewitnesses do no longer play a role in our everyday life. What we do in our educational programs no longer relates to the physical contact with eyewitnesses.
But does that, is there a danger in that we are losing sort of call it the single story? There's this quote from Dutch Jewish survivor called Abel Herzberg, who said, there were not 6 million Jews murdered, there was one murder 6 million times. And for me, that sort of the personification of history, that you sort of leave the numbers and humanize, because this was done 6 million times. And how does the next phase, Stephanie, how does this take care of those individuals?
I don't know if it... what comes to my mind now is this understanding, I don't know where I read this, that we can relate to a situation over a time span of 3 generations. That is, I personally can relate to things that happened to my grandparents, but not much before that. And I think that is also an aspect. So also young people today, they need other ways of approaching this time before 3 generations. So it's this the end of eyewitnesses that might relate to people of my age, because these are as old as my grandparents. So I have a very close understanding of their time, the context of their lives. But this is already no longer true for young people. So that's already beyond their understanding. So I have to catch up with where they stand right now.
I think there's also been a major switch in the dominant mode of how we communicate, and that kind of single story, beginning, middle, end of testimony, and the individual story is quite kind of didactic and broadcast in its kind of style. And that networked information, a kind of network age, if people want to call it that, it's much more about the fragments and the layers. And actually what you were saying about this relationship between the kind of 6 million and the individual is you can create a kind of a visual map where you can follow an individual from, say, Westerbork to Auschwitz, from Death March to somewhere else, to where they end up in a displaced persons camp, etc. But then also look at all the other people's experience in each of those areas. And an hour and a half session that you might have spent with a single survivor, which in the UK is often a lot of our students only get that as their Holocaust education. It's a quick Nazis, Germany, Auschwitz, listen to this survivor story. Often just one day of Holocaust education, how it's awful. There's lots of good organizations trying to resist this, but it is still quite typical. Then that's the narrative they get of the Holocaust. But if that was an hour and a half or half a day exploring a network of relations, then they actually might have more individual stories, and so more individuals are remembered. And the Jude's Monument, the Dutch project, which is a website where you can see like all the individuals as pixels, and then zoom in and then click, and then you can see how people were in the same family or related to living in the same neighborhood. It's a really kind of, I think, early example of the potential that the internet and network communication has for doing that.
And maybe that's also part of what I stumble across a lot, is this shimmering maybe between, so to speak, quantity and quality. I mean, very recently I read this quote, if we had a minute of silence for each victim of Nazism, the world would be silent for 11 years. And of course that somehow, that touched me. And of course it got me, into these dimensions of what it meant death-wise, to put it bluntly. But on the other hand, as Stephanie has pointed out, I think it's important for later generations that don't have maybe this personal connection to create maybe individuality exactly concerning the different people that were affected by the historical events. So I think only by, pointing to the humanity, again, coming back to that, and to the individualism of each and everyone that was affected, that's maybe how you can get people, again, interested and invested as well.
Now, a lot of things that we've discussed so far. We have 7 minutes left. Concerns tools or narratives that we can control, as memorials and museums. We can control this. We have curators. We have people to, do the thought work. But on social media, is that sort of a more dangerous place for Holocaust memories to be? In terms of trolls and the like.
Yeah, I think social media reminds me of being in a pub and you talk to a random stranger and you seem to be on the same ground, and then they suddenly reveal themselves to be fascist or anti-Semitic, and then you don't want to start an argument in the pub. Your friends are here, you're trying to figure out how to deal with that situation. It's not new. It's not the social media platforms that cause it. It's humans. Human culture. Yes. We are awful. We are the problem with the world. Yes. I think we need to look at ways in which museums and organizations and academics as well engage outside our comfort zone with people and have enjoy it's not about our brand and our page, and then I'm a hypocrite here because I have done that on Twitter and Facebook, but it's about how we engage in those conversations, and spending time actually chatting with people on their own things, and not just condemning. And having a conversation with someone who's an outright neo-Nazi is pointless anywhere. They're probably going to dox you, so you have to think about your safety. You have to think about what conversations you participate in, but there's no different offline to online, I think. And the same in the classroom. We all face difficult things in the classroom, and I'm sure Stephanie has it at Belsen as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think these new media is to some degree, it's only because we're not so used to them, or to some aspects of them, or things that come up right now. We wouldn't talk about dealing with photographs simply because you can how you Photoshop them, or we don't discuss the possibility of faking literature. Think of in Germany, I think that was in the 70s perhaps, there was this scandal of the faked Hitler diaries.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, and later on it was turned into a film, and it was a comedy, and everybody was laughing about that. But we feel safe about dealing with this phenomenon because we know it for quite a while now. I think, as Vicky said, we will be able to deal with new phenomena as well.
You think, because our last minutes, let's sort of sink into the fake problem. In January, a video occurred showing the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen at a press conference telling the public that every pork in the country was to be eradicated due to COVID. The video proved to be a deepfake, published by artist-rapper Nicolina to raise awareness. Now she writes this on Facebook: "Welcome to the information apocalypse. Reality has overtaken fake news. Soon we won't be able to tell the difference. Artificial intelligence is going to change everything in a mess of unreal reality and real unreality." Now this potential mess of unreal reality and real unreality, how could it affect museums and memorials? Does it have an impact?
I don't think this is new. I mean, Bondelard was writing about the simulacra and the simulacrum in the 1980s, worrying about kind of advertising and images everywhere. And museums are not, and people might be upset with this, are constructed narratives. They rely on conventions of imperialist technonomies. They objectify victims. They're involved in all these politics of representation. Everything is. The way I'm speaking now is a politics of representation. And I think really that the reason we're utterly terrified by deep fakes is because they open our eyes up to the fact that every image is constructed, and every image is something we should critically engage with and not take for granted. And the National Holocaust Centre in the UK has developed this mixed reality project called the Eye as Witness, where you put your VR headset on, you see the image, but then you turn around and you can see the image maker, the image producer, you can see the other context, and start to question the very idea of what was captured in the image and why, and the politics of that. And I think that deepfakes are just making that really obvious, and that's what scares us, that we've kind of been duped a little bit all along.
Okay, so we are not afraid of deepfakes in discussing Holocaust remembrance.
I think being afraid would be, again, the wrong move. I think it should be an encouragement just to consciously deal or tackle the topic and make people aware of it. I think it's also in the US, the Shoah Foundation has the Eyewitness program, where I think pupils themselves can cut their own testimony, so to speak. So on a meta level, they learn about how these products are in the end constructed and how they are always distorting, and that there is no truth to represent it, but everything we do is a retrospective interpretation of history, and we can't avoid that. So I think instead of putting fear in the center, it should be courage, yet still, to strive, to look forward, or to be invested, to be courageous, to be curious.
I think I agree with you. Use this this moment when everyone's talking about deep fakes to go, you know, what about all these perpetrator images? We have them in our museums. Let's look at them. Is that evidence of the past, or is it an ideological perspective on the past? Is it a deep fake? You know, a perpetrator creating an ideological image of what they want, how they want Jews to be perceived by their public. And then we can use the deep fake moment to actually get far more critical with our images.
And I think that's a very nice place to end. We actually have a happy end here. I thought we were going to, you know, going to the darkness of the deep fake and everything's going terribly wrong. But what you're actually saying is that the fact that we are discussing deep fakes now and have been doing so in several museums in the near past just provides a consciousness of the subject. And I think that's where we say thank you. So I say thank you to Tabea, Stephanie, and Vicky.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you on the big internet.
Thank you, everyone who participated in the panel discussion. We are now getting close to the end of this day 2 of our seminar. And with this, I would like to hand the word over to my colleague, Christian Semb, who has been an active participant in the planning of this seminar, and who would like to share a few words towards the end.
Thank you, Christian, for leading us through the seminar, The Digitalization of Memory. I want to thank each and every one of you for zooming in on our digital seminar. I hope this event can be a starting point for new projects and new corporations to further explore and expand the field of the digitalization of memory. As one of the people who have been in charge of planning this seminar, I will say thank you to everyone who participated and thank you to everyone who contributed. I would especially like to thank Magdalena and Greta for good cooperation and in the planning of this seminar. I hope to see you all again soon at our next event. On behalf of the Falstad Center and the Polin Museum of the History of the Polish Jews, we wish you a very pleasant day. Goodbye.